And tonight, more than a dozen presidential candidates will be in Des Moines for one of the most important events leading up to the Iowa caucuses. 14 presidential hopefuls will be speaking at the Liberty and Justice celebration. CBS News special correspondent Alex Wagner is co-host of Showtime's The Circus, and she's in Des Moines with details on why the event is so important.
Are those balloons?
They're actually called thunder sticks.
On the eve of one of Iowa's largest political events of the season, campaigns are scrambling.
Hey, Joan, this is Sydney with Cory Booker's campaign.
The Liberty and Justice celebration is a chance for Democratic candidates like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker to define the narrative and raise expectations.
Thank you, Iowa!
It's where then-Senator Barack Obama's presidential campaign was jolted to life in 2007, helping catapult him past Hillary Clinton and putting him on a path toward the nomination.
If they don't do well here, and by doing well, if they aren't in the top 2 or 3, it's over for them.
Matt Paul was Hillary Clinton's Iowa director for her 2016 presidential campaign.
Does impeachment matter at all? Does it make any kind of impact among the voting electorate in Iowa?
I don't think it's going to outweigh the importance of health care on the specific issues of co-pays, on premiums, on prescription drugs. That's what Iowans are dialed in on.
Iowa polling expert Ann Seltzer says impeachment animates the national audience, but in her state, the issue plays differently.
When Speaker Pelosi announced that she was starting the inquiry, I thought, I'm just going to keep my ear to the ground and see what happens here. And it was strangely silent. And really, I have not heard that many Iowans sort of start jumping up and down on either side.
Sean Sullivan is a CBSN political contributor and a national political reporter for the Washington Post, and he joins me now from our Washington bureau. Okay, Sean, so we've got this new poll from the New York Times and Siena College that found Elizabeth Warren leading, but is actually within the margin of error. And this is among likely Iowa Democratic caucus goers. Biden's in 4th place in a tight race. How much pressure is there on his campaign at this point to really get it right in Iowa?
Huge pressure right now. I mean, here's a candidate who, when he entered this race, was at the top of national polls. He was at the top of state polls. And we've seen, in some cases, in some of these early states, a pretty steady erosion in the past several months. As we've seen some of these other candidates, including Elizabeth Warren, rise up in the polls. We're also seeing Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, also rise in the polls in Iowa right now. So this is a really, really big moment for Joe Biden in this campaign. He's got to demonstrate to his voters and also undecided voters why they should choose him. And he's got to show some progress in these early states, because while he's doing relatively well in these national polls, we all know this starts in Iowa and then it moves to New Hampshire. So you've got to show strength in these early states. You've got to show strength in Iowa. And right now, his trajectory is not really a positive one.
Who else faces a lot of pressure tonight and this weekend in Iowa who really needs to make a splash?
Well, the other one I would watch is Pete Buttigieg, because he is sort of on a different trajectory right now. He seems to be rising in a lot of these polls. He got pretty positive reviews from a lot of Democrats for his performance at the last debate. And so this is a real moment for him. You know, when I've been in Iowa and I've been at these multi-candidate events, Pete Buttigieg tends to get really, really loud applause and big cheers. But you know, it hasn't really translated to him becoming the top candidate or a top candidate. He seems sort of right sort of on the precipice. And right now is a big moment for him. If he can go in there and he can wow this crowd and he can have a weekend with big crowds and a lot of energy, that could really, really propel him as we go into the fall. And if he doesn't do that, if he falls flat, if he's unable to accomplish that, it could also be a significant moment. It could be, you know, a sign that he's potentially squandering what could be a really, really good opportunity for him.
You know, Sean, what else really surprised us was this Iowa poll also found that Joe Biden's support is made almost entirely of older voters, and he leads among people over 65. But when you look at that percentage of people who are under 45, it's something like 2%. It's only 2% of the vote that he has there. So generally, the electorate skews older. Is this a significant problem for Biden that he can't attract this younger vote?
It is potentially a significant problem, especially if you are looking at a race that might be really, really close in Iowa. And you're right, it is pretty striking when you look at these polling numbers. Not only does he tend to perform really, really well among older voters, but he's performing very, very poorly, at least in this poll, among younger voters. And the age gap in the Democratic Party right now has been one of the most striking things about this election cycle so far. You have younger voters tending to prefer Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, and then you have older voters tending to prefer Biden and Buttigieg. So there really is a big generational divide right now in the Democratic Party between what younger voters want and who they want, and what older voters want and who they want. The key will be turnout. Who's actually going to show up in Iowa and caucus on what might be a really, really snowy night in February? That's the key right now. But certainly for Biden, needs to improve his standing among younger voters at this point.
And Elizabeth Warren, a lot of buzz today, for releasing details on how she'll fund her universal health care program. Explain to us, how is this supposed to work out?
Well, what Senator Warren has tried to do for a while is sort of combat the notion that supporting Medicare for all will mean increasing taxes on middle-class Americans. She's been pressed on this over and over again in debate settings and interviews and other places. And so what she's trying to do with this plan is present a way for financing Medicare for all. And again, it would be a very, very expensive program. There's a lot of agreement, at least on that front, that this would cost a lot of money to implement a Medicare for all system. But what she's saying is this is not going to be shouldered by middle-class taxpayers. We're not going to have a middle-class tax increase. We're going to have ways of paying for this that puts some new pressure on employers, that raises taxes on the wealthy, but it's not going to affect middle-class taxpayers in the sense that it raises their taxes. But you're already seeing disagreement from some of her opponents. You're seeing the Biden campaign push back against this notion and say, well, if you look at her plan and you sort of dig deeper into it, this could actually mean taxes that are passed down to American taxpayers. And so this is an issue that I don't think is going away anytime soon, but it's clear right now that Senator Warren wants to present this as a big sweeping plan, but one that's not going to hurt everyday people. That's what she's trying to do, and we'll see in the coming weeks how this plays on the campaign trail, whether people actually buy into this and whether they believe her or whether they tend to agree more with the criticisms that we're hearing from the Biden campaign.
So you see Warren's plan. How does it compare with Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All proposal?
Well, on the substance of the plans, in terms of how it would cover people, we're not really seeing any daylight between Warren and Sanders. We heard Senator Warren at one of the earlier debates say, I'm with Bernie on health care. The difference here is how they would pay for it. And there are some similar mechanisms that they are trying to implement here. And when it comes to Senator Sanders, what he has basically said is, look, yeah, I'm going to have to increase some taxes, but that's going to be offset by the money that you would save by not having to pay premiums, not having to pay these out-of-pocket costs. And Senator Warren has come up with a different way of paying for it. So in terms of how the system would actually work, they're talking about the same things. The difference here is in the financing and how it would actually be paid for.
And I want to ask you about Julian Castro's campaign. It announced that he had the self-imposed $800,000 fundraising goal. He's managed to reach that. He threatened to drop out if he didn't meet it. Last night was the deadline. So he's not really the first candidate to make this kind of a move. What would you say, Sean, is your takeaway from that?
Yeah, you're right. He's not the first candidate to make this kind of a move. We saw Senator Cory Booker do something like this. What we're seeing now is we're at the point in the campaign where the candidates that have not really gained a lot of traction are up against the reality that money is becoming an issue. And when you run out of money, you don't even have the resources to pay staff, to hold events. And so that's what usually ends campaigns. And so what we've seen the last couple of weeks is campaigns go to everyday people, go to donors and say, hey, I need to hit this certain threshold or I'm going to have to drop out. So they're sort of sounding the alarm. And in a couple of cases, it's worked. But when you look at the long-term trajectory of these candidacies, it raises questions about how long they're going to be able to stay in this race, because we have another debate coming up in November and then again in December. So it's going to be tougher for Castro to qualify for these debates and for other candidates to qualify as well. So right now, he's still alive. Some of these other candidates who have struggled are still alive, but it could just be a matter of time before their candidacies are unable to continue in this race.
Sullivan. Sean, thank you very much.
Thanks.